think I was going to say that if, for example, I grew up and I never knew how to use my arm, and then some kind of energy came in and showed me how to use my arm, it would feel weird at first to have this energy, like moving my arm in different ways. And then it went away, but then I knew how to use my arm. So then I didn't have to any longer have this energy sort of directing and guiding that learning process. It was made part of my embodied self. I feel like in the same way that this energy comes in map consciousness and sort of is directing us in different ways and making us behave in different ways in order to sort of show us the way, and then the energy goes away and it's up to us to work towards being that way. And it's not really working towards being that way, because in the process of being that way and learning with the universal energy, we see the absolute necessity to be that way. And so it's sort of like gravity. Sitting on this couch right now, I'm under the effects of gravity, but I don't really think about it. I don't sense it really, unless I actually think about it. But if I was falling out of a tree, I would be very aware of gravity. So it's something that's always there, but it's just a matter of we only feel it in certain contexts. So in our normal ego consciousness, we don't necessarily feel these other forces because it's like sitting on a couch. It's just part of the experience and we're used to it. But being in that other consciousness is like being in the field of consciousness as opposed to the field of the ego. And it's like really feeling the field of consciousness, because normally we're just in the field of our limited thought structures. And on page 112, I like this bit. He says, so how does our habitual thinking take us out of the present moment? By creating thought objects that take us into the future or past. These thought objects can take a variety of forms. Remembering, anxiety, toxic goals, worrying, blah, blah, blah. I just like the idea of thought objects, because even though they're very subtle, they're still objects. And by making it an object, we're actually placing ourselves in the past or the future. We are the object. We are the thought object in those moments. And so we are in the past or the future in those moments. And he says the future and the past are thought-generated illusions. Illusions that we experience in the here and now. But that goes along with what I was saying about how thinking is delusional. It is a hallucination. And another thing he talks about is how meditation has nothing to do with sitting cross-legged staring at the wall. It's something that happens in daily life. One thing I thought about was, how am I using the present moment? Or how is my energy being channeled or divided in the present moment? So if it's going into thought forms, it's actually sort of dividing itself and channeling it into these thought forms, and that's part of the waste of energy process. And in terms of how am I using the present moment, it sort of implies duality in a way. Could be more like, how's the present moment using me? And there is no real me, so it's like sort of like however I am in the present moment is how I am or who I am. Lately I've had this subtle, gentle, profound sense of gratitude. And it's not like a practice of gratitude where I wake up and think about what I'm grateful for, which is valuable to a certain extent, but it's still an abstraction. But I have this sense when I'm in the shower that I just feel so grateful that I have a shower to shower in, and a toilet to go to the washroom in, and a place to live in, besides the noise. But the last couple of weeks it's been quieter because of the snow, and I don't know if that's how I've felt a little bit more this actual state of gratitude. It feels like a state of gratitude as opposed to a feeling. And it's not like I'm in the shower and I'm thinking, I'm so grateful that I'm showering. It's this subtle perception of just feeling really grateful for having a shower. And to me, it could be because this presence thing is getting somewhat deeper, that I'm not even thinking about goals. What I'm trying to say is that the moment feels completely fulfilling within itself. So just showering is fulfilling. I'm showering and it feels fulfilling that I'm showering, and I feel grateful that I have a shower, and all of those sensations are present in the act of showering versus, say, using the shower as a means to think about other things. I often have a lot of insights in the shower, but I haven't been having as many insights in the shower. And the last couple of weeks too, actually, I've noticed that even my bed feels even more comfortable. Like I feel maybe a bit more embodied, that I'm really noticing my body more. And this is probably temporary. It's a flux and a flow of everything, but it's kind of nice. And if we create thought forms, we can't adequately respond in the moment. It's in our mind screen, it's in the way. A good question might be, what does this have to do with the moment here and now? And this process of creating thought forms, it creates inner space and time. It creates a direction towards the past or back towards the future that gives us this illusion that we have somewhere to go internally when there is nowhere to go. And no amount of movement by the psyche is going to create it so we can actually go somewhere else. And that all that movement, I think, is tied into dopamine and pleasure and blah blah blah. And when we're experiencing that as pleasure, we're not actually feeling our body, and our body just feels good to be embodied. It feels good to be alive without the need for pleasure. Pleasure covers over the actual innate fulfillment that we naturally have in an activity or in whatever it is in the moment. And that feels so much more rich. It's hard to describe. Whereas pleasure is just like, ooh, that's good, and pain is, oh, that's not so good. Good, bad replaces the richness of wondering what it is and just being with what's happening. And on page 122 it says, there was a philosopher, Kierkegaard, who said, life is not a problem to be solved, it's a mystery to be experienced. And map consciousness and trans consciousness definitely feels like life is a mystery to be experienced. And ego consciousness feels like life is a problem to be solved. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in map consciousness and trans consciousness. And that's what I like about being more in linear consciousness and still harvesting my mania and my experiences, because I can still stay in touch with the mystery and still be mystified and baffled and in a state of wonderment and awe. And part of me talking about it in this way too isn't to say, oh, that was the most pleasurable thing. That is more pleasurable, so that's how I want to exist. If I translate everything in terms of pleasure and pain, there's no learning in it, because it's just utilized as a means to an end to fulfill pleasure. And he talks about look away from the content of our experience and towards that which is creating our moment-to-moment experience the formless principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. So his whole book is about understanding the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness, not substituting thoughts for better thoughts, not all of these goal things, self-improvement, personal development. And he talks about how you'll still have ups and downs, but behind them is the knowledge of your inner resilience and the default setting of your innate clarity and well-being. And I think that's very profound, the default setting of your clarity and well-being. And I think it's profound because even when I go into extraordinary states of consciousness for a number of days or a week or whatever, my default state is still clarity, as he calls it, or non-thought, or the unknown. And he talks on page 128 about how a film is neutral, even if there's images and things happening on a movie screen. It's actually neutral, it's just light. But our interpretation and our experience of the film happens within us. And so two people watching the same film will have different experiences inside them. And he talks about too how the film is just light and how the light comes from the projector. And so if you turn off the projector, there's no light there. So it comes from this formless, and the projector translates it into light, and it's on the screen, and it takes form. But really, you can't have one without the other. You can't have the form without the formless, and the formless without the form. So to look at a movie and feel emotional about it, one could look at it and say, that's just light coming from a projector. And it's completely neutral. So in the same way, I think he might be alluding to that we can be neutral in our position of watching the thought forms and the light display on our inner mind screen. It's just forms coming out of the formless. And we identify with them and take them seriously, and that would be like feeling attached to what's happening on a movie screen in one's daily life. And I wonder if the energy is trying to map itself to get to know itself. Sort of like how Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about how the mind uses the brain to create itself. I wonder if that could be part of it, that our mind, if there's a personal mind, there's a universal mind, then there's sort of like personal mind, which is part of the quantum hologram. Each person is like a laser on a part of the holographic image to make the 3D reality appear. Well, what if one's mind is growing separate from the body in terms of one's potential, the pattern of who one really is from one's original trajectory, which I've talked about before, and we're pushed off our original trajectory of how we would grow in sort of like ideal circumstances and things like that. Whatever it is, I guess in a way it would be sort of like if you have a seed and you put it in the ideal soil, it's going to grow a beautiful flower. But if you put it in less than ideal soil, it's going to grow a flower, but maybe it'll be kind of wilty or susceptible to disease and whatever. So the mind is sort of like the original soil of a person. And so we can go all over the place with our programming and our thought forms, but our mind is still always there as that original soil, and it's growing with us and alongside us. And so this process of so-called psychosis or trans consciousness or map consciousness is trying to get us to sort of break out of our habitual patterns and sort of run around making new maps of ourselves by having all these varied experiences outside of our regular habit cycle where we're not even paying attention to anything anymore because we're just programmed into automatons. So we have this mind soil that's sort of arising with us, sort of like a person who has a delay in the aging of their consciousness and is, I don't even know the proper terminology, developmentally delayed or something. Supposedly, apparently, from our perspective, that's how they appear. I feel like there's another element that's growing separate from us. So we have our body, we have our sort of mind ego expression. Some people stay, the age of like a 10-year-old or something, and they're adults. From our perspective, who knows what the inner subjective experience is of this person? They might be enlightened for all we know. Like a frequency holder, who knows? But anyways, I think there could be another element, this mind, this sort of collective personal mind in a way, because it's changing with the collective soil and what the collective needs us as human beings to be. So it is sort of being altered, and it's almost like it's being poisoned by society slowly, which is actually what is the impetus for us to go into other states of consciousness, to make other maps of what is possible for ourselves outside the ego habitual expression. And the more we actually work towards embodying that, embodying our mania, which actually might be nothing more than not being habitual at all. Not necessarily a certain thing, but just not attaching to anything at all. The more we're in alignment with that, the more we're in alignment with the universal mind and sort of the personal mind in a way. Personal mind in that it's sort of what is affecting us in our environment, which includes our own conditioning and our brain and our experience and everything. But what I'm saying is the poisonous environment or poisonous psyche elements will eventually cause us to sort of burst out of this conditioning in order to make maps of a new way of being as ourselves, for ourselves, and for the world. So I think there's this mind element that it's always there. And if I was to snap into that right now, like if I was to go into manic consciousness, I would be a completely different version of myself, which would be just as real as the version I am now. There's no one version. This whole like consistent personality thing is an illusion. It's something we all subscribe to make each other comfortable. And because we're not creative and artistic in our experience of ourselves, in our expression of ourselves moment to moment, because we don't use each moment to express and learn from our expressions, and learn and then just forget and start again and just start over afresh. So I feel like that other consciousness is trying to get us out of that habitual way. And then as soon as we're out of that habitual way, we're seen as acting out a character, and then we get captured by psychiatry saying, well, take this pill and let's band-aid up your ego dopamine structure, which is going to prevent the other areas of your brain consciousness from flowering. And it's not even just about that for an individual's sake, but once a person transforms into that, they're going to be totally different in the way they're relating to the world, not from an egocentric point of view. And I think that's one of the fundamental things, is just to not have an egocentric point of view. And one might think, well, easier said than done. Well, exactly. That's why the universe comes in and does it for us. Maybe there is nothing we can do to actually really get to that. It's about the universe coming in. You could call it grace, you could call it whatever, but it's basically a grace that erases the ego disgraces. It's completely random, which makes sense, because if there were a way to get there, then someone could figure it out and actually contrive it. But when you think about if it's completely random, then there's no way to get to it. So there's no how-to, there's no self-help, there's no nothing. So the important thing I figured to do would be to actually learn about supporting those that do randomly go into it. So there's all these people out there trying their darndest to be spiritual or get to enlightenment. And I think I have just told myself, and I'm seeing the sense in it, that it's completely random. There's nothing you can do. So if there's nothing you can do, help the ones that go into it. But the thing is, the ones that go into it are mistaken to be mentally ill, and then help is in that type of paradigm, when if people were supported in their transformation, not as mental illness, but as this person has been randomly decontrived by the universe, then, and we better keep them safe because they don't understand the laws of consensus reality. They don't understand. They've gone back to their original state. They've had the slate wiped clean. They're like babies again, even though they're adults. And they need to be received with unconditional love and understanding. And perhaps that's the thing. It's the unconditional love and understanding that's the most important. For the people who have not gone into those other states of consciousness that are pushing a person towards enlightenment against their will, is to unconditionally love and accept and provide safe space and understanding and non-judgment for those who do go there. And that might actually be maybe the only way for people who want to get there, because it's really about learning and understanding about consciousness itself, not about being attached to the thought forms that we've created as conceptualizations and abstractions about reality, and then judging good and bad based on that. It's about understanding consciousness itself and seeing that consciousness is more powerful than anything, and it can come in like a tsunami at any time and change somebody's life. And then we put them into this medical paradigm, and then we have all these people educated in that paradigm of so-called help that doesn't really help anyone, but it just keeps one suppressed. And it's like a rebirth to childhood, and that person needs to be received like they're a newborn child. Be as a child. We're all trying to get back to that childlike consciousness, and the process of map consciousness and trans consciousness gives that to us. Yet we don't have the support structure for people to go through it. And then there's all the other people out there trying to be spiritual. Well, think of people that go through these other states of consciousness as trying their darndest not to be spiritual, because they go into this domain that's felt as spiritual because we're so far away from what it means to be human beings that we feel like it's so meaningful and spiritual. But by the people who don't go there helping support the ones that do, maybe we'll bridge the gap between materiality and spirituality, and that the material world will feel spiritual in that it will be innately fulfilling and exactly how it's meant to be each moment.